Yeah.
Okay, so the reason this came up is the previous session, Maria was talking about Seva from the perspective of Vedanta, and that's a very advanced perspective. And so she and I talked afterwards, and I said, people probably need to understand the full perspective. You know, what's the reason behind Seva? What's its purpose in our path? And then only can you really understand what the Vedanta perspective is about it. And because it's a very mature perspective, but Seva itself is part of our path to maturity in our spiritual path. And so there's lots of things that you've probably heard people say about Seva in terms of why it's being done. It means selfless service, and there's various interpretations of that. So some people say it's a means to clear past negative karma. Some people say it's karma yoga. It's a yoga of action, so taking action in the world and helping make the world a better place helps purify your soul. And some people do it to support their teacher, and this is a good thing that other people can then have access to their teacher because they're helping support that organization. And all those are good reasons. And the reason that most resonates with me is slightly different, and it's something that came in a session I was doing with Pornaji several years ago. It was a oneness session where he was tapping into deities and other beings, and we went very deeply into a meditative state. And in that place, there was a discussion of Seva. It was still, an important topic to me at that time. And the reason behind Seva came back through that as for self-absorbed in love or self-overflowing in love, that's the purpose of Seva. And so let me unpack that a little bit. What does that mean? Because Seva, if it's done without proper understanding, can actually increase the ego, right? Because there can be this sense of, I'm doing this good work and aren't I special? And of course, that's a risk that we want to avoid. And because what we want to accomplish with Seva is the other direction, that it starts kind of taking away the outer layers of the identity and allowing us to become our more full and complete selves and closer to the Atman and the true self that they talk about in Vedanta, which is a self that is everything, it's unity. And so self-overflowing with love comes about when you begin to take that action without any selfless desires involved. So there's you are willing to do whatever it is that you're asked of. So if I would show up. I did a lot of Seva at Amma's ashram in San Ramon here in the Bay Area, and Seva was an important part of her teaching. And so I would show up for an event, and I would always plan on doing several hours of Seva, sometimes long nights of Seva. And there were some that I really liked, and others that I found I would just do them because they needed to be done, and I was available at the time that something was needed. So one of my favorite ones was serving food to people so they would have basically like a cafeteria, and people would come through the line, and we served their food on their plates for them so that they didn't have to touch the food. And I always found that one really fun to do because you could kind of see people's joy and feel the love and energy of everybody. And so it was a very enjoyable Seva, and not surprisingly, everybody wanted to do that one. So it was like you got a special treat if you got to do that for your Seva. And what I found that was most needed often is working in the area where they did dishes. And it was this outdoor tent. So, we would do cold November evenings, and I would be there sometimes at 2 o'clock in the morning with a few other people washing dishes. And, we had some warm water, obviously washing our hands in, but our feet were getting cold. And so there was one friend of mine who used to sometimes, he would wear these rubber boots, and he would sometimes pour himself a pot of hot water and just go stand in the hot water with his boots on to warm his feet up. And so there were some joys in that one too, because maybe once an hour or once every 2 hours, somebody would come through with chai, and we would take a break and be served chai basically, and so we would take a break from our dishes, and there were always bhajans playing and the speakers in the room, so there was joy in it, but it was actually backbreaking work. You're leaning over a sink, and sometimes you're there for a couple of hours at a time. And I would do that seva often because it was the one that needed to be done. Not so many people wanted to do that, and there was something that I enjoyed about just being of service in that way. And so what can happen if you take the proper attitude toward that is you're no longer trying to do something and get recognized for it, right? You're doing it for there's some good happening, of course, but I'm just here doing the work. My hands are moving, I'm internally chanting the mantra, and there's a feeling of bliss that can come about in it. And then there's this sense of like, there are people who are being served food in the other room, or people who are having darshan with Amma, who maybe wouldn't be able to do that if there weren't this army of people doing all this work behind the scenes. So you then just begin to feel like you're part of this, almost like a big machine that's just happening. And it's through the grace of the guru that all of this is flowing together great, and things are working well. And there comes this point then in that where you start to let go of the sense of self. Like the sense of I am here doing dishes starts to wear thin, and it's just the functioning happening. And that's the real sense of love can be pouring through the heart, or sometimes other things pouring out of the heart center. And it's a sense of, they call it self overflowing with love, because it's the bigger sense of self. It's no longer your individual identity. So that's the real purpose of Seva, is to get to that place. It's not an easy thing to do, because you have to really, just be okay with whatever the situation is. Obviously, you wouldn't want to put yourself in harm's way or do something like that. But that's the focus of doing Seva. And so for me, what I've found over the years with it is that it's not like one night of doing Seva allowed me to reach that place, but continuing to show up and just say, okay, I'm here to do what's needed. I'm going to do this, and eventually it just wears through that ego shell, and it's easier to function from that place. You feel more grace in your movements, and it's easier to be happy while you're doing this sometimes, and you don't even feel the pain. If you're really there enjoying yourself, it becomes kind of a blissful state. So to me, that's an important aspect to really understand about Seva, and to then help avoid the place where you can get caught in bolstering the ego identity and feeling like I'm the one who's doing this, and I want to get some credit. Like maybe if I do some extra hours of Seva, I'll get some special favor from the teacher or whatever, or be recognized by my peers here and they'll like me. So you find all kinds of things like that coming up in your head while you're doing it. So let me take a quick look at my notes and see what else I want to cover. I'm trying to do this in like 10 minutes, and it's a very vast topic. So so one thing I didn't say, which I think is important when this sense of like overflowing with love comes about, it comes from a place of surrender. So you're just surrendering into that action, and then your consciousness can begin to expand. And as that consciousness expands, there's a sense of, well, the self kind of, the veils fade away. And so that can be, that's how it happens. So it's basically then we see it as a tool for expanding beyond ordinary consciousness. And it's something that has to be done again and again in order to really find that. So it's a practice, like a meditation practice, really. So when that love is really pouring out of your heart, that becomes the source of your action. You're no longer having to force yourself. And there's a whole another thing about discipline, and how does discipline play into this? To me, discipline is something that you learn to do something again and again, and you stick with it, but then eventually clarity comes, and the discipline can kind of fall away. And then in this case, as I was saying, if love becomes the source of your action, there's no discipline needed at that point. If you think about how Mother Teresa was when in her time in India, you know, the reason she was able to sleep 4 hours a night and work countless hours helping people that are really needing desperate help is because it wasn't work for her. She was serving, and it felt like this sense of love overflowing out of the heart and expanding. So that's the perspective that I wanted to bring in, so that we can keep a sense of, like, we're not doing this to get credit. We're not doing this because we're trying to burn off some past karma. We're doing this because we want to expand our consciousness. And then from that place, the whole perspective of Vedanta is easier to see. So I know Atmapriya wants to say a couple things about that Vedanta perspective again and tie it back in maybe, but do we want to take questions now or go through